So the agenda we've discussed, let's go and talk about the rationale for developing article sharing framework. So globally, many debates are taking place as to what role platforms should take regarding the content they offer our hosts. In the EU, a first step to regulate this environment was taken with the EU Digital Single Market Directive, or the DSM as it's often referred to. The DSM was approved by the European Commission in 2019 and must be implemented in EU member states since June, well, this June really, this year. This new piece of legislation, and its Article 17 specifically, presents a clear opportunity for platforms and the publishing industry to work together to enable the safe use of protected content and ensure a better experience for platform users. Article 17 clarifies that when certain types of platforms give the public access to user-uploaded protected works, this engages the rights holders' exclusive right to communicate to the public. This makes the platform potentially liable for copyright infringement, unless it either obtains or makes best efforts to obtain an authorization from rights holders to upload protected content, or to ensure the unavailability of any protected content for which rights holders have provided relevant and necessary information, which is what we'll be talking about in a second. But in any event, that they act expeditiously upon receipt of takedown notices for content that was illicitly posted. Although the bulk of responsibility lies with the platforms, Article 17 puts an onus upon rights holders, so publishers, STM publishers, to supply platforms with relevant and necessary information. This to ensure that platforms can fulfill their obligation on the upload of protected works. To ensure the publishing industry meets its obligation to platforms, STM assembled a working group under STEC to develop the technical processes needed for this. These processes are described in the article sharing framework. It is important to note that the framework is not a solution that platforms can plug in. The framework is an implementation guide, an industry standard, if you will, describing how publishers can provide the relevant and necessary information and how platforms can utilize that. Allow me to emphasize right away that the framework is not an upload filter. The information platforms obtained through the framework enables them to share content in a legally compliant way. Ultimately, it will be up to the platform to decide as to whether to allow the upload of an article or not. Nothing in the operation of the framework can technically prevent this from happening, and so there is no automated blocking. So what constitutes the relevant and necessary information that publishers are required to provide under Article 17? Here we need to consider researcher sharing habits, so the different article versions they typically share, the different motivations they may have to share those versions, the different platforms they choose to share these articles on. But also we need to consider that publishers have specific policies for each of these contexts. In light of this, platforms require tools to easily identify the article version, and subsequently the applicable sharing policies for a given article version. This they need to determine article shareability. The trick here is for publishers to ensure this information is provided in a machine actionable form, so that platforms can obtain and act on the information automatically and in real time. So the framework is the industry standard for providing the information that publishers are required to provide under Article 17. I'll now briefly zoom in on the scope of the framework. The framework has been designed for platforms covered by these new obligations set by Article 17. This concerns online content sharing service providers, or OCSSPs as they are referred to. That is, platforms that are typically commercial in nature and that make available large amounts of content to the public. The policies expressed through the framework are therefore focused on these platform types specifically, and it thereby excludes personal blogs and websites, as well as institutional repositories. These are explicitly not in scope. The DOI and the journal article version metadata can be embedded in any journal article PDF. However, as part of the framework, publishers are required to deposit sharing policy indicators for content that typically does not bear a Creative Commons license. As such, the framework applies specifically to subscription and open archive content. However, As the framework builds on existing industry standards, this means that when platforms would look for the sharing indicators, they would be looking at the same metadata section in Crossref as they would to identify Creative Commons licenses. Publishers themselves decide whether they will make the relevant and necessary information available for their front files or for the back files as well. Though first focus may be on getting this up and running for new content first, as that is what's typically shared most by researchers. It is incredibly important to keep matters manageable for platforms and to enable them to automatically implement and use the information that publishers provide. Given that there are over 5,000 academic publishers worldwide, and with that a likelihood of a huge variety in policies, having these publishers coalesce around a limited set of policies is of great importance and value for publishers, platforms, as well as researchers. Also, many publishers have yet to determine their sharing policies, or they may want to revisit what they've got currently. Many may want to use this as an opportunity to align their policies with what prevails in the industry. Being able to choose from a set of policies that have been carefully defined by colleague publishers may be truly helpful. Although STM sharing policies are limited in number, publishers can be reassured that they offer flexibility for every publisher to set a wide range of policies. This includes the ability to set different policies for accepted manuscripts and for the version of record, or for sharing publicly versus for collaboration. So the framework is scalable to a variety of sharing contexts. This, however, also means that the framework will not allow for custom policies to be expressed, as that would truly weaken its value and potential. For the article sharing framework to work, publishers are required to embed additional metadata into places where they include metadata already, that is in the article PDF and Crossref. As such, the costs incurred are expected to be limited and likely mostly related to labor required to set up the initial processes that thereafter are fully automated. For platform, the following elements are needed: software to extract the metadata from article PDF, which is typically available open source, and access to Crossref's metadata API. This API is available free of charge. Yet for a better performant API, one is required to pay a modest fee. However, it's not expected that platforms suddenly need this better performant API in light of the framework to work. The article sharing framework is the result of a cross-community collaboration. STAC members have been able to find an elegant and relatively simple solution to a complex problem without having to build new technical infrastructure. The framework is built upon two existing and adopted standards, this being the NISO Journal Article Versions, the JAV recommended practice, and the NISO Article and License Indicators, ALI. And it also involves Crossref. And in light of this, we expect this will ease any challenges of implementation. The article sharing framework is an agreed standard specific to our industry, as it considers some unique aspects of academic publishing. For instance, the sharing of different versions of articles, the sharing for different purposes. So for instance, whether that's done in research collaboration groups or for general access. By the way, as this is all about enabling responsible sharing, implementing the framework is actually also a logical next step for those parties, be they publishers or platforms, that endorse the STM voluntary principles for article sharing. The development work for the article sharing is in its final stages right now. An update to NISO's ALI recommended practice will be soon made available to NISO members for review. And it's based on this that Crossref will update the XML deposit scheme so that publishers can deposit the policy information to Crossref, and so that platforms can also pull and extract that information from Crossref and utilize it. The framework was announced at the STM Spring Conference, and since then we are actually very keen to engage with publishers and platforms outside this STAC working group. This to build recognition and support for the framework, and naturally to help ensure a successful rollout across our industry. Although the framework results from a working group under STM, it's by no means meant for use by STM members only. Any information and documentation on the framework is available on the STM website. and Dan will again repeat that, link in his presentation as well. And we encourage you to have a look at that, and as it includes a lot of information about integration guide, FAQs, protocol for platforms, and so on. So to round off, I would like to mention a few things about the framework that I would much like you to remember. And that is that the framework is simple yet pragmatic. All information provided is machine identifiable, and as such can be easily implemented and used by platforms to check article shareability automatically and in real time. Also is scalable, and it can be implemented at low or zero cost and is available for anyone who wants to make use of it. The framework is built using existing industry technology and practices. And despite limited in number, the STM sharing policies enable publishers to set the policies precisely they want for their content. As publishers rally around this limited set of policies, it ensures implementation by platforms is manageable. And that is of great importance. This to avoid ending up in a situation that platforms are throw their hands up in the air and say, this is all way too difficult. There are just too much flavors of policies for us to work with. Also, as part of the article sharing framework, platforms will obtain all sharing options for a given article version, meaning that platforms could identify alternative sharing options should they want it. Either way, the information provided through the framework is always clear-cut and unambiguous. And lastly, and as also mentioned at the beginning, the framework is not an upload filter. Platforms choose themselves whether or not to use the information they have obtained through the framework. And I think that's it for now. And I think it would be helpful to now hand over to Dan so that he can show you some high-level insights into the how of the article sharing framework for both publishers and platforms.
Thank you, Esther. Good job as always. And thank you for having me here. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my intro screen? Great. Okay, I'm Dan O'Brien with the American Chemical Society. Thanks for having me here. As Esther said, we're here to introduce the article sharing framework. I'll be covering the highlights of implementation. This is not going to be a detailed step-by-step how to implement, but I'll show you the overall perspective of what's involved, and I'll show you the resources that you can consult for implementation. We also have some workshops that we've had in our scheduling that will be more interactive in nature to allow questions and answers, troubleshooting for implementation. That being said, we still expect to have some time at the end for questions and answers here. Okay. At its core, the article sharing framework is, as Esther said, adding relative and necessary information to, are you seeing videos on top of my screen here? There. Is adding relative and necessary information made available to platforms for the purposes of Article 17. There's two parts. Their publishers add information to the article PDF, and publishers add information to Crossref. Platforms retrieve that information and use that information to do a lookup in Crossref to determine whether the article can be shared. And as Esther said, this is a framework. It's not an off-the-shelf solution that one can install and start using. So this is a guide for implementing the components. Most of these are already existing components that's already out there. Crossref and open access technologies. Specifically, publishers will add article identifiers to the PDF and will deposit sharing policy indicators into Crossref. We'll see how a lot of this is already in place today. And platforms will use the article identifier information from the PDF to perform a lookup into Crossref. We're going to step one by one into each of these four areas. So publishers adding article identifier information to the PDF. There are two fields involved with uniquely identifying the PDF article. One is the DOI, but that alone is not sufficient to uniquely identify the shared permissions. We also need to know which version of the article it is, the JAV, journal article version. Journal article version, for those who don't know, is a NISO recommended practice. There are standardized values for a JAV version of record. Accepted manuscript and author original are those three that we're using in this framework. The NISO recommended practice does define other ones, but we're not using those in this framework. So those two fields, there's two ways to encode those fields into the PDF. Many publishers have been doing this first option for a while, adding the DOI and the JAV to the XMP section of a PDF. Here on the right is a screenshot of an XMP display from Adobe Acrobat of an article, from ACS. You can see highlighted is the DOI and the JAV. So many publishers are already doing this. We're also identifying a secondary encoding method, and that is to add the JAV as a parameter to a DOI hyperlink on the first page. You can see here is a first page of an ACS article, and if we zoom in, down the bottom right is a DOI hyperlink, and hovering your mouse over that DOI hyperlink shows there's actually more information encoded into that hyperlink than it was displayed on the page. Part of that information is the JAV. Why are we doing two encodings? A couple of reasons. One is a lot of older articles have a PDF format that does not allow XMP. But a bigger reason is we found that a lot of times by the time an article reaches a platform, there are cases where the XMP metadata can be stripped away, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Sometimes it's easy for that XMP metadata to get lost out in the wild. And it's much harder to drop the hyperlinks along the way. So two fields, two encoding methods, two optional ways to implement this. One way is to add these fields when the PDF is generated. So during production, during your PDF composition process, whatever is generating your PDFs, change that process to also include these these fields in your PDF. A second option is to inject those two fields at the point of delivery. So when an end user requests to view or download an article PDF, at that point, the delivery system inserts those two metadata fields into the PDF. Publishers need to choose at least one of these. And ACS is doing a hybrid of both for two reasons. When ACS PDFs are distributed in multiple venues, multiple ways. So for new articles, we are adding the fields during PDF creation. But for older content, we have our delivery system inject the fields upon download. That way we don't have to go back and update all of our back file with all this data. So that was publishers adding information to the PDF. Now we'll look at what publishers do to deposit sharing policy indicators to Crossref. There are 4 sharing policy contexts defined: platform type, displayable elements, the JAV, and audience scope. So the number of permutations between all these values is 48. So there's up to 48 different policies that can be expressed using a different combinations of these sharing contexts. Here is an extract of a table that is in one of the resources available to you. Each sharing context equals 1 policy. And each policy has a unique identifier. It's expressed actually as a policy DOI. The intent here is that publishers will deposit to Crossref 1 or more sharing policy DOIs that represents the publisher's sharing policy for a given article. As an example, ACS and Elsevier have publisher policies, sharing policies. We're not going to go into detail here. What I want to show you is the amount of green or red displaying between Elsevier and ACS. You can see that Elsevier is allowing more sharing and more contexts than ACS, so they will be depositing more policy identifiers. Typically, once a publisher maps the article sharing framework policies to their own publisher policies, they're set. They just do that once, and then they know which sharing policies to deposit to Crossref. Again, we are focusing here on subscription articles, not open access articles. So once a publisher has determined the sharing policies that map to their subscription content, they typically apply the same set of sharing policies to all articles, all subscription articles. Here's an example. For a subscription article, a publisher may decide these 3 article sharing framework policies will apply. And they would deposit those 3 for every article, every subscription article. A question we've received in the past a few times is, what about embargoed content? What about future dating these sharing policies? That is supported. There is a feature within Crossref to allow a start date for a given set of sharing policies. So we are using the same license ref tag within Crossref that many publishers are already using for Chorus. So for publishers who are Chorus members or participating in Chorus, you are likely already depositing to Crossref Creative Commons or other OA licenses to identify which articles are publicly accessible. This article sharing framework builds on that and would have publishers deposit sharing policies much in the same way. Next, we're going to look at platforms. What do platforms do with this information? Again, platforms will look at the PDF in an automated fashion and extract the 2 fields that identify the article, the DOI and the JAV. Platforms can automate the extraction, and both methods. We actually have a proof of concept that would demonstrate this. Free libraries exist, such as Apache PDF Box, GEMP Box, that allow zero-cost software to be used to extract this data. So after the platforms extract the article identifiers from the PDF, they use that information to perform a lookup to Crossref. Up here, we will model what a platform may extract from a given PDF, a DOI, article DOI, and a JAF. A platform will use that information to determine, in conjunction with the intended sharing context and the type of platform they are, which sharing policy URIs, which sharing policies they're looking for. In this case, in this example, a platform is looking for policy number 29 that maps to their intended sharing context. If a publisher has deposited policy 29 to the article's record within Crossref, then the platform can deduce that the article can be shared within that context. However, if a platform is looking for a different sharing policy, and that policy is not found in the Crossref record for that article, then the platform should deduce that the article is not shareable for that context. So in this case, it's a simple binary yes/no decision tree for the platform. So again, embargoed content. Platforms will also need to look for the start date and treat it as an effective date. If no start date is provided for a policy within Crossref, that effectively means that the policy is effective immediately. Here you can see two examples, one with a sharing policy without start date, one with a start date. So to recap, we have publishers that need to add information to the PDF, and we have publishers that need to also deposit sharing policy indicators to Crossref. Platforms will extract that information from the PDF, and they'll use that information to do a lookup into Crossref. For publishers on the call, something you can do right now is this step, is adding article identifiers to the PDFs. Several publishers have been doing this step for several years. And that's that results in a number of PDFs already out there in the wild that have this information ready to be used by platforms. So this step can be done immediately. Start adding DOIs and JAV metadata tags to your PDFs. Coming soon, we will be working with Crossref to finalize their changes to support the publishers provided policy changes. One change that Crossref will be adding is allowing a article sharing framework designation within the license ref tag. We're expecting that in late summer or fall. And at that point, publishers and platforms can start leveraging Crossref to do the deposits and lookup. As far as resources, again, as Esther mentioned, here is the URL that provides all of the information that we've made available for implementation. I'll show the contents of that here in a second. Three notable items on that page, though, are the implementation guide that covers both publishers and platforms. There is a policy information spreadsheet and tool that provides a lot of the information that you would need to implement, and also an FAQ. For those who are implementing with Crossref, you might have already seen some information from Chorus about how to deposit information to Crossref for license indicators. And of course, along the way, send any questions to us. We can be reached at asf@stmassociation.org.
Thank you, Dan. I just wanted to add one comment about those publishers that have implemented DOI and JAV tags some time ago already. These are, for instance, I think there are 7 in total. It's the American Institute of Physics, it's the Institute of Physics in the UK, it's the American Chemical Society, it's Springer Nature, it's Wiley, it's Taylor and Francis, and it's Elsevier. So this has been implemented since 2016, 2017, and we estimate that roughly 6.5 million, if not more already, PDFs out there have those XMP and metadata tags.
Referring to this, Esther, right?
Yeah, so that's quite a lot already, and that's really good. We just want to encourage other publishers to get going with regard to the PDF tagging as well, because it's incredibly helpful to platforms. Some publishers, everyone tags the VOR. The majority of publishers also tag accepted manuscripts. And Elsevier, for instance, also tags the proofs. We tag proofs and VORs. So just a bit of information I wanted to share with this group.
Thank you, Esther. Here is the resource page at STM's website. You can see it as /ASF. Towards the bottom of the page are the good resources, including the implementation guide, the policy indicator information. This is a spreadsheet, and FAQs. The implementation guide. This is the FAQ. Implementation guide has quite a bit of information. A lot of it you just heard at a high level. And if there's time and interest, we can also show a functioning proof of concept that models how a platform would use this information to extract data from a PDF and perform a lookup to Crossref. But given that, I think it's time for questions and answers.
So does anyone have any questions about the matters we've talked about just now?
You may take yourself off mute, or you may submit questions in the chat.
Yeah, of course. So a question from Daniel: are there any plans to extend this to institutional repositories as well? I think that's a really good question, Daniel. And it's something that's come up in the STEP group a number of times as well. And it also was asked by Lisa Hinchliffe when we announced it at the framework at the spring conference, STM Spring Conference. So we see that as a phase 2. I think there seems to be sufficient appetite amongst publishers to do a phase 2 of the project and see what we need to do to support this for posting on institutional repositories. I think the focus right now is on a successful rollout of the framework as we have it today. Also, of course, implementation by platforms, and then enter into this phase 2 of addressing the needs for institutional repositories. I hope that answers your question. And then please add if there's anything.
Yeah, you got it right.
Then a question from Chris: have there already been any platforms such as ResearchGate committing to the framework? Of course, ResearchGate is the party that I think the whole industry would be looking at and would desire to use the framework. We, the STM, the leadership team, so of STM itself, has tried to establish contact with them. I can't share anything more than that right now. But thing is, they have to comply with Article 17. And this is the industry standard that will help them to do so. Clearly, there are other routes. They can enter into direct licenses, for instance, with all publishers individually. But as said, this is the industry standard, and we've attempted to make it as easy as possible for them, for any platform to use. So we really welcome them to start using this. I believe that the implementation in Germany itself has been delayed until the August 1st. So they have a bit more time to comply. But yeah, it will be interesting to see what they'll do. Speaking for platforms that are owned by Elsevier, for instance, Mendeley and SSRN, they are both enabling sharing of content, Mendeley in private research collaboration groups. SSRN, of course, public uploads of working papers. And they have different use cases, but they're currently exploring like, okay, how can we and when shall we implement the framework? So this is, platforms do show interest. They know increasingly more what their obligations are. But yeah, ResearchGate would be the big fish, of course. So Chris, if you have any suggestions on how to approach ResearchGate, or you're welcome to sharing that with us. Long time no see, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
You're on mute.
Here we go. No, not really any suggestions, but have there been any other platforms apart from the ones owned by your own company, Esther, that have committed to this framework, to this process?
Not yet commitments, only engagements that this is something that we can offer them, but no commitments yet. But yeah, the STM is making considerable effort to reach out to platforms. There's a list of 40 or 45 platforms that we are in regular contact with, that we provide them with information, that we invite them to these sessions, but no commitment yet, no.
So, and I also understand from the first question is that there is no Article 17 compliance required for repositories. Is that correct?
The Article 17 is really focused on online content sharing service providers. And the definition that comes with that is that these are those platforms that are typically commercial in nature. And it explicitly excludes the institutional repositories.
And then my last question is, what is the internal timing for all of this? When do you feel there will be enough critical mass already in terms of number of publishers, or either in number of content, so that you can make a stronger case? Because that's, I believe, is also the background of the whole setup, that we can make a stronger case against the social networks. So what is the timing of this all? I have several smaller publishers that we work for. And of course, for them, it's just a matter of prioritizing one development over the other. So a bit of timing would maybe be helpful as to when you envisage this should be getting into a phase where we really can't do without.
So I think in terms of critical mass, those 7 large publishers have implemented the tags in the PDFs already, but they now need to map the policies to their content. And of course, we're dependent on Crossref here on making their deposit schema, updating this one. So but publishers, that doesn't mean that publishers can already start the investigation on their side, and that publishers as to determining what policies they want to apply, because very often publishers don't have sharing policies, and that requires some time to set on their ends, of course. So publishers shouldn't wait. They should just really get going, in our view. So we truly hope that by August, end of August, hopefully, Crossref will be able to have updated their deposit scheme so that we can then start depositing that information. Having those 7 large publishers embedding tags and sending them policy information through to Crossref, that means we've got 45 or 50% of the STM output already. But yeah, we need more. So that's why we're organizing these webinars and workshops to encourage other publishers to get going.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just reiterate, Esther, I think what can happen today is enabling adding those DOI and JAVs to the PDFs, and also developing publisher sharing policies. So that's the first step.
Then we have another question from Daniel. Do the policy indicators include the license under which a version can be shared under after an embargo, if applicable? Or can be shared under, sorry. So these policy indicators are DOIs, and these DOIs point to policy pages that are hosted by STM. And then I think you've still got the website up, I think. So perhaps you can show an example of the landing page that these policy indicators point to. This means that although the information provided under this framework is all machine identifiable, so it can be automatically implemented on the side of the platforms. But during the setup, during implementation, platforms will have to visit those policy pages and read the actual text to understand what they mean, what they can and cannot do when specific policy indicators come back to them through Crossref. So Dan will show you in a second what that looks like.
So this is one of the landing pages for one of those 48 article sharing framework policies. This is the page for policy number 3. So it's not required that a platform actually traverses the DOI to find this page, but this page is available as with human readable text about what the policy allows. What a platform would do is simply create an accept list of which of these policy DOIs map to their sharing contexts as a platform. So much like a Creative Commons URI will eventually direct towards a human readable version of a public use license. We have the same instance here where a sharing policy DOI redirects eventually to a human readable version of the sharing framework policy.
Does that help, Daniel? I hope.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's
great.
Great.
Good.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone on the phone?
I want to acknowledge Vincent Lizzie, who's on the call here, has been a huge assist in development of many aspects of this framework. So shout out to Vincent. Thank you, Vincent.
Yeah. Good point, Dan. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the shout out, Dan.
So I encourage you, if any follow-up questions, please do email them, contact Esther or I through that email address or directly, or register for an upcoming workshop. Be happy to talk with you further and work with you on your questions and concerns in implementing this. Thanks for taking the time with us today.
Thank you very much, everyone. And again, get in touch in case of any questions and so on. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.